Welcome to the Black Lodge Games live stream. Tonight we have something really special for you. We have a guest here, John N. McGowan. Excuse me, almost tripping over it already. Terrible pod. Let's restart it.
Yeah.
No,
Like Garfunkel the Wise.
yeah, exactly, like Garfunkel the Wise. But John McGowan is here to talk about his new book, The Living Campaign, which both of us picked up and read.
Mm-hmm.
Really pretty interesting stuff. And for the chat, we will probably take questions at some point. We'll definitely read super chats, but this will be a little bit different since it's a conversation. We're not necessarily going to be talking to you guys the whole time like we usually do.
Yep.
But at any rate, welcome and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of want to give you a little opportunity. This book is essentially like a game mastery book. It's a book about how to run a long-term sustainable game. And it's fairly clear, I think, that you state that it's this is good advice for a particular kind of game. It's this is an adventuring party that is out for gold and glory. And I think it might not be explicit, but definitely like gold for XP being, if this is the kind of game and incentive that you're looking for, this is how you actually do this successfully and can do it long term without running into a lot of the problems that come up with what some people will call like conventional play.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could give us kind of a little bit of background on yourself first, just for everybody. Tell us kind of where you came from in gaming and what really compelled you to start thinking about this stuff and write this book.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I originally started as a Pathfinder First Edition guy. I mean, really, I my first edition I ever bought was fourth because I didn't know there was a difference in editions at the time when I'm 16 years old. And none of my friends ended up playing that, so we ended up kind of going with 3.5 for a couple years. Pathfinder comes out. I start running that. And I kind of had to be the DM in the group because nobody really, liked it.
Many such cases.
Yeah.
And I kind of enjoyed it because I always wanted to I like writing, I like doing stories and like all that stuff. So I was very happy to have an outlet for all that. And then I ended up actually like in like 2009, like 2010, like I ended up like running games at like the comic book store, like my local game store.
Sorry to hear that.
yeah, I know. So it was fun. Like I did it for a bit, and then I moved. So and it had to end. And then I kind of where I moved to, I kind of started founding tables here. So I kind of came from kind of like a more conventional style, but kind of a recurring thing I kept running into. Like this was sort of the impetus for change. Was a thing I kept running into was mass combat. And mass combat, you basically run your head into a wall trying to do it conventionally, because it's never satisfying, it's never fun, and everybody kind of goes through it like they're kind of going through like some sort of like medical procedure. And I got to do it for my health. Like that's kind of the attitude around the table. And so we ended up. So I was like, you know what? I'm tired of it not being fun. There's got to be a way to make this fun. Like people do war games. Why can't I do this?
Yeah.
So my first instinct was to start looking into war games. And naturally, when you look into war games, you start looking at the connection between war games and D&D.
Yeah.
And then you fall down a rabbit hole, and then you write a book about how to do it. So.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the only game that I felt did mass combat all right was, funny enough, a game that I loathe, Exalted Third Edition, because it's not very war gamey in the way that it runs, but it does allow in that game your character you're essentially a demigod, and so you can take on armies after once you gain a certain amount of experience. You can take on armies by yourself, but they had a system for abstracting that in a way that actually played well and was very fun. But outside, it took 3 editions for them to get there. And unfortunately, that game is marred by being bad in so many other ways that it's a lot less satisfying to play in for basically any other purpose. But yeah, it is something that definitely comes up over time. And you make the point in the book that most games, role-playing games at least, don't have mass combat built in at all. And you almost always have to get a third-party supplement or, they add in a mass combat supplement later. And it's just something that's not actually fused into the core of the game itself.
No.
So coming up against those kinds of problems, how do you actually run mass combat in whatever system that you're running?
So typically what I'll try to do is scale up from whatever the system actually is. So it's like a lot of these, when you're doing like the kind of these like small party skirmishes against like another party, each character could be perfectly representative of like a company of soldiers. Like the things that are true kind of at the individual level are still true at the kind of the mass combat layer. You're moving soldiers around the battlefield. There is like battlefield tactical considerations. The kind of the individual characteristics of like the soldier types, things like that, are basically classes. Like and when you add, and you can still have like your heroes. Like your heroes can be attached to them, and they still kind of have their own actions on top of that. So yeah, that's basically how I run it. The way I kind of describe it in the book, is kind of like at a 1-10 scale. So for every 10 soldiers, there's one action to be had in like whatever kind of system that is, whatever that looks like. So like in Pathfinder, it's like your swift actions and your move actions and your standard actions, and whereas in AD&D it might be segments or rounds or turns.
Right.
But all of these, like these systems being so different from each other, what I found is all the ones I've experimented with anyway, which are admittedly D20 systems, they do scale up pretty satisfactorily, at least, as compared to what,
right.
It's like, if you could, like, it's a, I mean, Ultimate Campaign in Pathfinder First Edition is what adds mass combat to Pathfinder, and those mass combat rules are atrociously boring, like criminally boring. So
which is such a shame. I mean, it's like you want something that looks like a battle in Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, and you want your characters to actually have actions that matter.
Well, I mean, I'm the idea of mass combat. A lot of D&D games in the D&D lineage, they will pay lip service to mass combat, to domain play, to these motivations, responsibilities, these actions, which come with having a considerable deal of power, wealth, influence. But as we're talking about it, it's no one is doing it. Or very few people are even thinking about it in a way to make it flow well. But even beyond the implementation from like a rules perspective, there's an assumption at some point there's going to be an inflection point. You're going to go from an adventurer to someone who's a general or a king or something along those lines. But just as there's no thought, advice, instruction, or even rules to how to do these things, where and when that actually takes place is equally unclear. I could have the equivalent of a dragon sword of gold pieces on my character sheet, but when do I transition? Why do I transition? How does that work in your games? At what point do either the players take it upon themselves, or it becomes sort of hinted at through story hooks and through greater, NPCs and factions who are taking notice of them? How are you sort of ushering them from like the dungeoneer to the general?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a few ways. So from a rules, like to kind of go from the rules perspective and then kind of from like a broader narrative perspective. So from the rules perspective, the rules sort of operate in a web of like interconnectedness. Like, so there are second order effects upon second order effects upon second order effects. So, and when you take anything out of that like house of cards, you kind of risk the whole thing coming apart. So if you're not getting something, if you're not getting an effect that you're trying to see, so in this case, like I would say, like actually a pretty good incentive for kind of transitioning from adventurer to conqueror to king would be like encumbrance rules. Like you just need somewhere to put your gold, you know.
Yeah.
And when you're at a point where you're like, if you can have all 200,000 dragons, if you can carry a dragon sword on your back and there's no issue, you know, like even getting away from the verisimilitude, just from a pure gameplay perspective, it is not, you're not providing an incentive for them to plant roots. And when they plant roots, things naturally kind of blossom from there. And that's what I use that kind of very specific example to kind of show how certain rules that seem unrelated, because you wouldn't think, like I wouldn't think on its face, encumbrance is related to nation building.
Yeah. So we can touch on the mass combat stuff again in a bit, but the kind of point of this book, at least in my opinion, is that there's a lot of things wrong with the way that most people are running their D&D games or just whatever. Pick your game system. They're problems that are common that come up. People burning out because they prep too much, or people not being able to sustain this kind of like long term. The GM, I keep laying down these railroad tracks. I keep coming up with this narrative and kind of tricking the players into thinking that this was all them creating this as well.
Right.
And you're offering kind of a alternative that seems to harken back to a lot of the kind of older school stuff that you would see kind of out of the AD&D DMG, and a way of kind of generating a world together, starting very small and expanding out from there. What can you talk about? Like, what are these problems of conventional play? Like, what are the kind of big ones that you think that are kind of intractable without making some of the changes that you're suggesting in the book?
So most of that is kind of thinking about it in like a 3-act structure. Like, you have like you're trying to hook people and drag them along in this very rigid way. And the talented DMs are able to do it in such a way that the players don't realize they're being dragged along. And I think it's wrong and unfair to expect like top tier talent from like everybody who wants to play this game. And I don't mean that like in a derogatory way. It's just like, if you're, for me, I have limited bandwidth. Like eventually I just sort of like, I don't want to deal with that anymore, so the conventional play, I think, is a series of advice. Like it's sort of informal advice, which is also a problem because you can't like compile any of it, and nobody can really reference it to each other in relation to each other and compare notes in any way that like consensus can be reached. And it's usually like pulls from a very specific milieu for a very specific type of people in that milieu. So yeah, I that's kind of what I think, is that it's just not, I don't think the advice kind of broadly as it exists is good for most people. I don't even like know if it's a plurality of people. I think it's a very, very specific type of person that is kind of okay with sort of this kind of vibes based, kind of like, well, don't do it too much, but dude, like, do it too much. And it's not, I don't know, like that's not, again, replicability is something like you need rigidity in some places so you can build something on that. Like you have to lay the foundation.
Yeah. So I mean that I agree with you. A lot of the sort of conventional wisdom, quote unquote, is sort of, it's just osmosized from the community, such as it is.
Talk to your players.
Yeah.
Well, talk to your players. Talk to your players again. I'll leave that meme for another time. A local, but talk to your players will not get you anywhere if your players have a room temperature IQ, or who are not they're not interested in doing the thing that you want to do.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. However, the conventional wisdom is the conventional wisdom, whether we like it or not.
Correct.
Why would you say? Why do you think that the hobby has sort of evolved in the way that it has, such that this is like the ascendant way of doing things, as opposed to what you and others are trying to resurrect or regain an appreciation and an awareness from, which is how the game was more intended to be run at the outset?
Sure. D&D, like in the 70s and the 80s, experienced like a mimetic explosion. And when you're in here's a metaphor that I think applies, is that if a very small company, very efficiently run, is acquired by a much larger company that is very inefficiently run, that smaller company has all the better ideas, it has the better structure, yet it's still absorbed anyway. So I'm not a big believer in, like, my reading of history is not that the best ideas always win. My reading of history is that sometimes the best ideas lose because they're sort of diluted by kind of a tidal wave of bad ideas. And so when you're in this situation where, it's this very niche, like kind of like building, like kind of evolved from like a war game hobby, you have an influx of 500,000 people without the internet to talk to each other. And it's just sort of everything is by osmosis at that time. It has to be but the technology is just not there. You do have a situation where you have a bunch of people who are not war gamers suddenly in this, or even with that, even like an appreciation for the mentality, is suddenly kind of they fill the pool. Like the puddle becomes a pool, and all the new water is muddy. So this sort of pristine thing is sort of muddied up by people who don't really have an appreciation for what they're kind of walking into. And in fact, a lot of time they seem to have a disdain for what they were walking into, because So, and that's kind of why, that's my kind of reading of like why I do like these ideas, why I think they're become an alternative and they are not the contemporary anymore. It's just because, like, again, this is what popularity wrought, and then at that point it kind of gets absorbed into the system. And even Gygax, is redoing Unearthed Arcana, because like his TSR has like financial issues.
Right.
So, and everybody kind of agrees that Unearthed Arcana is like a little bit of the, like an odd duck from the kind of the big three. So,
have you read by any chance? I don't know if it's up here. The Elusive Shift.
No.
Oh, so it's an
Who's
excellent
that by?
book. Do you remember who it's by?
No.
It's got to be around here somewhere.
We'll have to
It's
get
on
it.
the other side. Yeah.
Okay.
It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon. We're
I'll look
both
it up.
Nick read it, and I'm reading it now. But it actually,
Amazing book.
Yeah, really, really good about kind of the roots and origins of the hobby, and
it's made me way more appreciative of the community, such as it was in like between like 74 and 80. Which is what that book. That's the time period. It's like broadly like six years. It talks about the before times and a little bit of references to after, but it's primarily about the earliest incarnation of the tabletop hobby.
Yeah, of
Interesting.
role-playing
role-playing
games specifically.
Yeah,
once this new thing has been made,
right?
And I think you're right about the kind of mimetic explosion. Yeah, by Peterson. Someone Peterson. Yeah, Primeval is here. Primeval's who recommended this book to us, by the way. Great guy.
Yes.
Great channel too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but he so it goes over that a bit, because it explodes out of the wargaming scene and gets really picked up by the fantasy literature and science fiction literature scenes, which were very, very different, but already had this kind of infrastructure of magazines and communication. Gygax wrote for a couple of them, not very often, but a few times. And you get a lot of different people, like people who were not wargamers at all, immediately fascinated with Dungeons and Dragons. And so things do change very considerably with that. But it's a fascinating book. But I think you're pretty much right on the money there. And
But can I say? I'm sorry to interrupt you. And that's kind of also why, like, I think it's worthwhile to even write the book in the first place, is because, like, you don't these ideas sort of like they hedged everything out, 40 years ago. I think now is a time to where you can actually start kind of making a foothold, which is why I don't think it's pointless to just like fight the tide a little bit.
Oh yeah, I don't think so.
It's
at all.
definitely not pointless. I will say I am skeptical of, like, if you look at the hobby as this monolith,
Yeah.
that is ever going to be changed, and
No.
I don't see that as a problem. That's not like a black pill.
Yeah.
Nobody should care about what the hobby,
yeah,
capital H,
No,
is,
I would agree
is
with
doing. But these smaller communities that are, nominally within that sort of umbrella of the hobby can have very clear identities, have very good ideas, and can be striving for something. So no, it's definitely not a waste.
No, it's not a waste at all.
To write the book or to lay these ideas out in like a formal way, which is clear, understandable.
And this is also just a kind of a broader point where people, we get criticized a lot because we're elitists, and we are.
Correct.
And the pros are typically also very elitist, and they lean into that, which is one of their admirable qualities. The thing is, when people look at like the state of the hobby, they're trying to think about this in terms of like, how do we fix all of these people,
which is the completely wrong
wrong. I mean, that's not how it works in
anything else.
Yes. It's never the masses of people, deciding how things go. It's basically you have elites who make a very big difference and basically function as kind of informal, sometimes formal, a lot of times formal, but a lot of times informal leaders, and people kind of fall in line behind them. So the idea that like, this is I don't think that this is an unworthy cause at all. I think it's actually eminently worthy. So and we need more writing like this. So there's a whole lot of ideas in this book. One of the, I think probably in the beginning of the book, if I'm not getting the structure wrong, I can't remember exactly, but you talk about generating a world. One of the big things is that you say basically everyone is going to like everyone who's a game master worries about having the good setting and fleshing everything out beforehand. And you're basically saying like, forget it. Don't do that. No. What are the advantages to that, and what are the disadvantages?
The advantages is that you get to play. So like just that kind of by itself is kind of like the you get to play in a reasonable timetable. It's like, so you can announce the game. The time between announcement and first session 1 is minimal. So that's a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Partially as well, like 2 is that everybody sort of like, even in sort of like, I think it's useful to look at the broader hobby in the sense of like kind of getting kind of the ideas, but I agree with you guys in that like building a parallel structure is kind of the way to go forward. But I still look at like, even they kind of like go through it and they make fun of like the DM who wants to do all the exposition. They're just like so desperate to like get their exposition out. And, I don't like, so when you have like kind of this, kind of the bare bones setting, you have a head of state, you have like a national name, kind of like a broad sort of like, I don't know, veneer to kind of spread over it. You open up a lot of ways for the players to come in and be like, well, I kind of want this to be my character's backstory, or I prefer background, but backstory works too. So like I encourage like the backstories, which is kind of where I kind of break faith with kind of the more like purist. I do a thing called the 10-minute backstory. It's a 1-page paper. It's just like 5 traits, 5 memories, and like 3 contacts, 2 positive, 1 negative, like 1 antagonist. So every character somebody makes, it takes them, it's a little thing they fill out their character sheet, it takes them 10 minutes. And I have, if I got 6 players, I have 6 potential antagonists and 12 contacts.
Yeah.
And Yeah, and like so you take these things and the players are able to be like, are able to sort of add their 2 cents to the setting and they feel a certain ownership over it. So not only are you not like busting your butt and like trying to like build pages and pages of like like whatever like Bungie did with like the Halo Bible or like the Fallout Bible over in like Obsidian and stuff. You're not building a Bible. We're not writing a Bible here. We're trying to get a playground for players to get together and be able to sort of like do something meaningful, I guess, like in a hobby sense. So that's I think that's the big advantage.
That makes sense. I do have to highlight this comment here. Someone says, ugh, a backstory form. There's a lot of people who are not backstory enjoyers. We definitely are, though.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I don't require it. I don't require it.
Yeah, it shouldn't be more than one sheet of paper, in my opinion.
Honestly, it shouldn't be a piece of paper at all. If I'm the GM, I should be having a conversation with you, and we talk about it.
Yeah,
I really don't want to read anything, whether it's a paragraph or a novel. I would like to talk to you about your character, where they came from, and we could sort of make this work.
But
together.
that is also because you have dyslexia.
True.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
Oh.
No, I agree. And we're obviously 100% in agreement on that. I like essentially the way I like to approach, starting a new game is to come up with a broad concept. And this is not exactly the same as what you're saying, because I do like a well thought out pre-made setting. I think there's big advantages to having that.
Sure.
But I think I agree in terms of if you're going to come up with your own setting, starting small is a very good idea, because there are people who will write an entire like Wikipedia scale background for the world before they get it to the table. But I do enjoy having a well thought out setting, just even as a game master, because it's something I can consume relatively quickly and have a very good grasp on how the world works and really have a grasp on what the genre is of the game. And I do think that there's an advantage there.
Sure.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Sorry. Right, and like that's kind of also kind of the point of the book, though, too, is that like I do try to acknowledge a few times is that there are parts that the game master prefers to work on, and the idea is that I try to present alternatives basically to every sort of contemporary thing. And if there's something about the contemporary style you like, then that's playing the game for you, as far as I'm concerned. So it's like you like a well thought out setting and building a nation, or maybe like a history, or developing like the royal family or whatever, whatever that looks like. I'm trying to provide a framework where you have the time to do that, and you're not having to like massage like player hooks into like this grand narrative. You have more time for the things that you prefer to do, even if it's not like quote unquote the most efficient.
Yeah, and that is actually, I think, one of the big mistakes that people make is coming up with the grand narrative. Even if you have an idea of like you think some future conflict would be really cool to have in the game, coming up with a grand narrative before the game starts is a very bad idea. Because it's gonna put you into that. It is essentially like the shortest distance between 2 points between here and the cool thing is a railroad.
And you're going to be, or you can, as the GM, become impatient.
Yes.
This is the thing I want to happen, so let me speed it along to make that happen.
The players are getting in the way of my thing happening.
Right.
Yeah. So it's better to come up with kind of a loose concept and to then have players contribute to that and come up with characters that are going to be compatible with that concept. But the so you go through and you offer some kind of random generation for terrain and for natural resources and things like that, so to give you sort of an idea of what there's basically the implication is if you know the kind of natural resource layout of the region, that actually tells you a lot about the economics of the potential, the economics of the world. And that is really cool. The thing I really did enjoy about the book was very much like the kind of cost benefit, like everything is trade-offs, and there's not that seems to be kind of the the analysis through the whole way is that there are trade-offs to all of these things. And when you get into the kind of bigger, more, which is absurd that it's controversial, but the more controversial thing in this book is the inclusion of one-to-one time.
Yes.
That is approached, I think, very, very well, because you kind of set up that there are some problems with not having time management and show that this one-to-one time idea solves the big issues. There are edge cases, and some of those are discussed in the book as well, but it's not treated as some sort of like panacea that's going to solve every single problem.
No.
And which I think sometimes is how it's been presented by other voices.
Yes. Well, and it's the thing is, like, I don't knock them for doing that because they're very excited about it. So that's not, I appreciate that enthusiasm. I may not 100%. Like there are things you just run into. Like sometimes you have players who just they're also like these people that do this, that are very excited about this, also have excellent players that are very, very engaged at all stages of it. So like there are some things, if you do have a more beer and pretzels game, like you're not going to have kind of like the wacky downtime stories. It's going to be a lot of, I go shopping, I do this, I'm going to look into this quest, and then you get around the table and you have something to do. Right. So and that's fine for some tables, and other tables, they are going to be like super excited. So I'm running 2, and they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. And some of them actually might be listening to this. So they were joking with me. Yeah, so they were joking with me, saying like, "Oh, you're throwing shade at we're the beer and pretzels game." I'm like, no. Like you guys are having fun. You guys are having fun.
We'll throw shade.
Yeah, we will throw shade.
Get better.
So, but yeah. So I don't know. I was rambling for a bit.
No, that's okay. So
yeah, I think I really enjoyed the section on the one-to-one time because it explained the mindset and what it helps solve, or what it tries to solve, in a way that was clearer than anything I've heard in the online discourse. And I could see a big benefit in this sort of you're almost giving a spotlight to downtime actions, or you're giving space for quote unquote downtime actions to take place in between sessions, so that players can get excited or get involved, interested in more individual goals that may be difficult to spotlight in the limited time of the weekly session. So I think that's a tremendous point in favor of one-to-one time. Another big benefit that strict time management seems to allow is a play style which sounds like hell to me, but a lot of people really enjoy it, or at least say that they do. Where having a one-to-one time really opens up the world and opens up the GM's bandwidth to have many, many, many players, or many different types of games, because no one's stepping on each other's toes. We're doing this. We came back from the dungeon, and now 2 people are recovering from wounds. The wizard is researching spell. They're all isolated, locked up, doing sort of whatever it is that they're doing for the amount of time that would naturally make sense.
Or is dictated by the rules. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So now the game on Thursday, that was the group on Sunday. The group on Thursday can really, whether it's has some of the same people playing different characters, or just a totally different group,
but within the same campaign world.
Within the same campaign world. So that makes sense to me. But I wonder, is the utility of, in absence of having large groups of players.
Oh yeah.
I definitely don't want to do that, and I don't think that's how a lot of people play that. Does that diminish some of the utility of maintaining one-to-one time? Again, it's still being the case that if you want to do stuff in between sessions, that's still a benefit.
So it kind of allows you. So when you have obviously less people sort of can provide more granularity should you wish it.
Mm-hmm.
Play by post is a thing that many people do.
Mhm.
Right.
Play by I've seen the forums over the years, play by post forums. I'm not sure if they're still like that. I haven't been in a while, but they're quite. Probably most of that happens on Discord now. But you basically are able to combine around the table with kind of a play by post format, should you require it. Now, and this is sort of kind of based by player, and if you only have let's say 4 to 6 people, you can really it's actually just easier to track, is what that does.
Yeah.
Because all the bandwidth of running 20 people is reduced. You kind of doing the same. What's efficient for running 20 people is quite efficient for running 6. Does that make sense?
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
So the bandwidth it requires to run a game for 20 people is diminished. You have a lot more. It frees you a lot up to be able to run it for the same thing for 6. It's efficient for 20. It's even more efficient for 6. Is kind of how I see it.
And I would say before we get too far into the weeds on one-to-one time,
Sure.
For people who may not be familiar with what it is, can you actually explain what is one-to-one time? How does it work? And what are kind of some of the implications of it? We've already touched on some of those, but just for the sake of clarity.
One-to-one time is a method for tracking the passage of time in a campaign. And that method is involving where time passes at some specified rate between sessions. So the AD&D First Edition DMG lays out time. So we say 1-to-1 because 1 day out of the game equals 1 day in real life. And so you end the game on Thursday, your characters are on a 4-day journey. They're going to arrive 4 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, at some point during the week. And then they'll be able to sort of do things. They'll be able to declare actions. Typically, they'd only be able to declare so many actions in a day. So if you're going shopping, it's not I just go shopping and get all the stuff and that then I'll just do 100 other things. Going through the city might take you half a day. So you might get a shopping action and a research action, you're going to carouse and look for quests or something like that, or see what's the problem. Or if you have the character background, you're going to be going into your character background and looking meeting with contacts or something like that. And those are what you're kind of able to do. If you don't put any actions in, your character is considered to sort of be living their life normally. And then time passes. I usually allow backfilling up to 48 hours because life gets busy. But anything more than that, any benefit from having kind of that slowdown of time is just sort of gone, because what you get is people just put all their orders in the day before session.
Right.
And then you're having to adjudicate 7 to it's
which would defeat the purpose of
you're burning all of that all the benefit of having the time management in the first place.
Right. So, and so it gives you that, so I allow 24 to 48 hours of you're able to backfill a little bit, depending, but yeah. So, and that's one-to-one time. It's just, it's a method of tracking time, and you're sort of using the real world calendar in order to do it.
Yeah. It's, and it seems to solve a couple of problems. This idea of kind of, at times, one of the kind of issues with conventional play is that some players get too much of the spotlight. It may be part of the game, even that a particular character has something that they're going to do that does not directly involve everyone in the party, and this seems to kind of offload that into these interim periods between games where you have time advancing, and they can kind of those actions can be sent to the GM. You can kind of adjudicate those. You could even potentially get online and role play them with the players who are more dedicated in those things. And it solves the problem, at least it seems to. It solves the problem of people having too much of it's not having too much of the spotlight, but people consuming too much time of the game, where you have a lot of other people at the table. And this was
it's a big problem.
Yeah, it's a big problem, and it's the thing is, it's a problem that isn't immediately obvious, I don't think, to people, because this is the way that everyone's been playing. We've played like this forever, is the session ends probably in the middle of something happening or something about to happen. Time stops. 2 weeks later, a week later, you get together with your friends again. Time picks up right where it left off. And so those moments where time at the table is being consumed by one or more players who have more of an individual investment, or there's just naturally something in the game is leading to that way. It kind of gets rid of that. And that's, like I said, it's not an obvious problem that people are necessarily thinking about, but it is a big problem. Correct. And it can be in certain games, it can become it's almost like baked in.
I mean, it's interesting. I like thinking about it. I actually think like a normie game, strangely enough, wouldn't have these problems, which we have had because no one is doing anything anyway.
Well, that's
so like you probably don't need to keep track of time because nothing matters anyway.
Right.
Yep.
But yes,
but if you have a group that has active players,
correct,
who are getting into things,
we should be considering here.
Yeah,
that is an issue, and there are games where this issue is exacerbated, and you do make points several times in this book that this advice is not intended for games that have like a different loop, something like Vampire.
I actually was thinking of Vampire specifically. When I made it. So
but the thing is, it's a huge problem in Vampire.
Yeah, because that is the game.
That is the game, because so much of that, like I ran when I was at the tail end of high school, I was running a game of Vampire the Requiem, and I think we played almost weekly for like 2 years, and it was great. It's one of my favorite games that I've ever run. But by the end of that, each individual character had so much going on individually that it was like the sessions were
every
just getting
session
split.
They're split into multiple solo scenes.
Yeah,
the
like
game are only solo scenes.
They were having less and less to do directly with each other, and the thing is, like from the kind of narrative perspective, if that's what you want to call it, it made sense, because as they were growing more powerful and older, like there was less of a reason for these people to be together anyway. But it was becoming a kind of a very big issue, and that, of course, that game fell apart because we all moved out of different places for college and whatnot, and the internet wasn't so great back then. But it's no one has. I don't, at least maybe in the LARPs, I'm not sure, but I don't think anyone has ever addressed timekeeping in Vampire at all.
I wouldn't know. I'm not up on the LARP scene, but we've been thinking about this recently. To put our thoughts together on this, but
because it's like it needs something. There needs to be something there.
There needs to be some consideration, because the narrative aspect of the game does require you to be like isolated, like your own. We're all doing our own thing,
right?
You know what I mean?
And the other thing is, it's funny, is that I've seen people complain about one-to-one time. It's like it slows everything down so much, and this being like a bad thing. But for Vampire, it's like it needs to be slowed down.
Please, relief.
You live forever. You're not supposed to be doing things things of great import every single night. It really. So that really kind of threw us for a loop. I was just like, oh my god, no! That was like that's a massive
there's some really
issue.
Interesting things with the philosophy of time management, and I'm interested what your opinion is. So like the older iterations of D&D have you have this one-to-one time.
Yeah.
There are other games, maybe in earlier editions, they also made one-to-one time more explicit. But in the logic of the game world, from a mechanics standpoint, there may not be mention of time management, like on a mechanical level or as a meta conception. But a world like Pendragon or RuneQuest, the world of Glorantha, in Pendragon, just as in the real world, you're playing a knight, a martially oriented individual, and you have the campaign season and you have the winter season. Wars and battles are generally not happening in the colder winter months because of obvious reasons. And that half or that quarter of the year is dedicated to sort of courtly intrigue and sort of if you want to call it adventuring activities take place. Similarly, in RuneQuest, your family, your clan, your community is a very important thing for your character. And so generally speaking, also in certain seasons, and there's a period at the end of the year in that world called Sacred Time, where these very important religious rituals are undertaken by the community. And so generally speaking, people naturally come back to their homes to deal with those quote unquote downtime things. What are your thoughts on that, where maybe you don't have strict one-to-one time, but the world itself implies a kind of I don't want to say a more loose, but let's call it loose, but
Sure.
A more it has the idea of time management somewhat in the world itself.
So I'm just a believer in having time management, period, like having some method. So this is why I don't really go around picking fights with the old school people, because typically those tables have a form of time management. It's not, they might freeze time, but they are tracking time generally pretty meticulously. And the only thing I present everything in this book as an alternative to the conventional wisdom, and it's something that's more easily replicable, at least by my estimation, from a resource perspective. So if you have a baked in time management method where it's I'm not super familiar with Pendragon has the adventuring seasons or whatever. If those rules kind of dictate okay, based on X number of days in game, that goes into, it goes into this season or whatever, some sort of, I don't know, 1 month per adventure. If they have some way for you to track
That's generally speaking, at least in RuneQuest, if I remember correctly, the general assumption is each adventure is about a season.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that sort of fulfills the criteria of what I'm talking about. So
something on this exact topic as well. I was talking to Crossface about this. He said that in RuneQuest 2e, they actually did have a time rule that was something during those other seasons, 1 day out of game is considered 1 week of the passage of time. So they actually had.
It doesn't surprise me that I was more explicit earlier on.
Right, earlier on, it was more explicit than it is now.
I saw him post that. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. It's yeah. No. The other thing that I found very interesting about this, because I think that this is one of those cases where this seems very weird to people, so they start looking, immediately the edge cases come to mind. That was the first thing that when I heard about this, I was like, well, what about all of these, getting stuck in the dungeon or whatever. But one of the big appeals of this after reading this was this is easy. The one-to-one time rule is just really simple. There's not much to it. And so it's sort of this it seemingly solves a lot of these bigger problems and it's dependent on certain adjustments to gameplay. And you make that clear, it's you're not ending the session in the dungeon. The idea is, or even, necessarily on the edge of a camp that you're, going to go and speak to the NPC in the next session. That's not what happens. It's like you go out and you do some adventuring activity, and then you come back home, or at least to a place of relative safety. And that is the end of the night. And that's the end of the game session. And that's something you have to actively be aware of when you're playing. It requires that gameplay adjustment to get people to actually make this work. Now, assuming you're doing that, this does seemingly wipe out like a whole class of problems, and then maybe introduces some weird edge cases. It's like it comes up with, maybe there's some different problems that you have, but these really big problems that you're dealing with that you might not even really be aware of just get wiped out. It's kind of like in computer programming. It's like having like a good type system wipes out an entire class of bugs just from ever happening, and so it seems like a pretty big advantage there, and it doesn't seem like that big of a burden. And the other thing is, this is something that the bros have talked about quite a bit, is that if you're following things with like training time rules, or even if during the session the calendar advances 2-3 weeks or something, you cannot play those characters until the real world calendar has caught up to what happened in the game session.
Correct.
And so if you want to play before that time actually happens in the real world, you have to make new characters.
Yeah.
Like you have to play other characters, which is kind of awesome.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you fall on that side of it.
Oh yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
I think that the thing is I get attached to characters, but at the same time, like I just love playing this game.
We were talking offline about this, and you reminded me of this comment. Another really big, advantage or quality. It's not really an advantage. It's a quality of this strict timekeeping. Is it forces players to, hopefully, if you've chosen your players correctly, to maintain the focus and the attention and the passion for getting into character, maintaining that immersive focus, while also being loose and flexible and not having, getting, pissed off that something bad happened to your character.
Right.
Stop white knuckling the steering wheel when you're in the driver's seat. Pay very close attention, but also, because of the demands of the world and the dynamic of the medium of play, be flexible enough to, with an equal amount of focus and passion, play another character,
play a different character,
and another character,
which
is exactly how it should be.
Yeah, and it also. You brought this up, and this is something we've wanted to do, like this kind of troop style play for a very long time. It's there's some very appealing stuff about it, and I like. The thing is, you're never always sure if you create your special snowflake character that you love so very, very much, you might find that if you create some throwaway character, that you're going to be a little more loose in the game, because you're not white knuckling the steering wheel. You're not so concerned about them. And that kind of frees you up in that session to be a little bit better at role playing, in my opinion. And you have more fun, and then you get attached to this other character as well. And and having more characters, if your character dies, you're not so, you're not going to kill yourself,
well, some people,
but there's a big advantage to having a big stable of characters. And the idea, though, you also present is that sometimes someone wants to end up being the villain. And this has happened in several games that I've run, where someone ends up becoming the villain, but they essentially just become an NPC at that point in the game, because it's hard to have that person, playing that character in the same party.
The party dynamic sort of falls apart.
Right. But you
Right.
can like
You can still do
this way.
that.
You can
Yeah.
there's still a way to do that in this kind of style of play.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
which is really really cool. I like that because it creates a lot of different kind of emergent opportunities. So yeah, I think that this is I'm not sure that it's not a problem if people like, I just want to play my one character and we're going to do this one adventuring party. But I do think they're missing out on
Yeah.
something.
Right.
They're definitely, this is something where it opens up this new kind of avenue for gameplay. And it's not like you don't need one-to-one time to do this style of play, but it makes it happen if you want to play on a regular schedule.
Right.
By design,
if you take the philosophy seriously.
Yeah, by design, it brings you to that kind of naturally without having to like, okay, guys, play something else. Like you don't have to like, strong arm anybody into doing anything. And like you said, players as villain is like kind of tragically underused. I'm
totally.
You when you have this so the big advantage of like you have your downtime orders like and first I want to go back to kind of an earlier point about kind of ending in the dungeon and stuff. You talked about ending in the dungeon and how you don't really do that, and for the sake of the book I would kind of like, I think that is the easiest way personally. I say if you want to end in the dungeon, that's okay, because now your characters are my solo party and I'm going to run the dungeon for you in solo, and they go oh, we don't like that, we're just going to leave. Or sometimes I have players that are like, we don't care, yeah, that sounds fun, just tell us how it goes. And like it depends on the character, but I still leave it like, so even that, like I kind of leave on the table under certain circumstances, and then they get like I'll do like a type up and like a full narrative of like what happened, and I keep them updated like kind of on a like turn by turn, like via text and stuff, so they can refer to it. And so there is kind of a good line of communication, but I don't force anybody. It's just one of those things where it's like, you gotta go back to town, guys, if you kind of want it to be so like only you. And then and like having those downtime options, like on Discord, you have like, I have a guy right now who's running. I rolled a random encounter of a vampire at level 2.
Oof.
And the reaction roll, she was hostile,
Oh,
and she killed one of the guys and raised him as a vampire. And now instead of being like, okay, I'm gonna take your character sheet now, and then you have to so I said, you want to keep your character and you just be a vampire spawn, and you're just going to do your downtime orders, like, so now he's building like a criminal syndicate in the capital city as like the vampire spawn.
That's like, awesome.
And he's doing it like in a PlaybyPost way. But now we're kind of at a point where kind of the main characters are like, which their main characters sort of always emerge, like at least in my my experience with this style. And so the main characters are a little kind of like down. They're not really got anything going on at the moment. Now they're kind of filling with like, hey, you want to build an evil party to kind of run with like your vampire spawn, and he'll like lead them around. We'll do like kind of cool evil guy shit. And they're like, so the players are like, heck yeah, let's do that. So it's really, really cool. And at no point was it like, PvP around the table and like everybody's like tempers are flaring. It's like, no, there's a clear demarcation between the vampire spawn character and his hero character, and his hero characters are looking for the vampire spawn character to like find him and resurrect him. And he's very, very committed to doing this like correctly.
Right.
He's very, very committed to being in character and doing this correctly, and not like kind of advantaging one character over the other.
Right. And that's kind of a risk. And I think that's like
filter.
It's a problem. It's the only time that it's a problem is if the player is clearly invested more in one character and they want them to succeed. But the whole thing is like, you have to, this is one of those instances where it's like, you kind of just have to be sportsmanlike, and separate the two characters. And that can be very difficult for people to do.
Right.
But that is, I think, the correct solution. I do remember a time where a character, this was many years ago, became evil, like basically sold their soul. And I was like, okay, they can be an NPC now. And in retrospect, like that was a total mistake, because you lose as the game master. Like one of the great things is like when you have good players and active players, they bring such life to the characters that you could never do. And so in that situation, having the player get to be the villain is so great. And this literally just happened in our last act session this last week. One of our players fell down a well intentionally, basically. Fell down into the second level of the dungeon into a lake of cursed blood, basically, and is now has all these horrible mutations, and like joined the evil that lives below.
Right.
But I was like,
neat.
I'm not taking this character away. Like, I'm gonna let her, because we made a bunch of characters already, so there's backups and everything like that. But I was like, you're gonna. I was like, I want you to fuck with the party as much as possible.
Nice.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it's a really, that is something that is very appealing. And again, like, we're not running 1-to-1 time at the moment, but it is something that forces you to do these sorts of things, and that is a very cool and advantageous thing in its favor. Now, in regards to things like having getting stuck in the dungeon, and you potentially then turn by turn playing out the party's actions and solo gaming them out of the dungeon. This seems to be one of the big edge cases. This is something that we had a problem with, and still, like, I wouldn't want to hand over control of my character to the GM.
Absolutely is a problem. Absolutely is a problem.
I don't, as a GM, I don't want to fucking do this.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to.
More to the point, I would much sooner give my character over than to be forced to fucking run this like a round by or turn dungeon turn by dungeon turn solo game. And like I can understand, it does make sense if from like a character perspective, because a dungeon is dark, it is dangerous, it is frightening, to want to get in as much as we can and then get out. But sometimes things go wrong.
Yeah.
What if you're trapped in the dungeon?
Right.
Something happens. There's a cave in. What not only whether you want to leave or not, I can't leave.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or if you have a very large dungeon that's again, I don't know how prominent large dungeons were in older editions of D&D, but I can imagine something like that. If you're in the Underdark in Faerun, you can't just leave.
Right.
It's been many days for you to get down there. I don't know how long it is, but I'm curious, like in a situation like that where your hands are tied, what would be how would you handle something like that?
Some form of negotiation would have to take place between player and DM. I mean, like, that is an extreme edge case. I haven't actually had to deal with that. So, but I'm thinking about it, just kind of like, let's use the Underdark as an example. Did you guys ever play Baldur's Gate, like 1 and 2? Like
I played the first one of like when it came out. So I barely remember it, but have been playing 3.
So Baldur's Gate 2, spoilers, you end up trapped in the Underdark at some point. And there's the Deep Gnome village that that's there, and that's kind of like a rest point where you can like sell your stuff and get your loot, and so you're not like weighed down. You don't have to walk away, leave all this loot, not be able to get paid for it. So it'd kind of be one of those things where you'd have to have the players are sort of having to adjust their play style, and if you're going to put them in this situation where like that's a possibility, because then you're probably going to have to adjust kind of how you do things too. Of all you want all those other things that we kind of talked about before, as compared to what again?
Right.
Right. You're going to come into, it's exactly that. You're making a trade-off to potentially solving these other large problems to maybe having these edge case situations that are going to require these negotiations. And I'm still not sure we're actually going to try 1-to-1 time yet or not, because we're just getting so used to a new system at the moment.
There's a lot of looking up the rules.
Yeah, there's a lot of other, there are bigger problems at the moment, so to speak.
I don't blame you there. There's a learning curve with anything. So
but oh god, I just had something. It was about 1-to-1. This was another thing, and so this is actually this is not something covered explicitly in the book, because this the book, you don't really talk about this is more of a broader sort of Bro SR thing where they've been running these campaigns with, like multiple DMs or just like lots and lots of people. And it's an always on kind of thing. And
that's also a cool idea, like multiple GMs, something that people don't do anymore.
Oh yeah.
And with like one-to-one.
But again, that does potentially sound like hell to us.
It does sound like hell.
And the reason being on that is we're very picky about who we play with, and we don't.
You should be.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's opening up the number of players. You're potentially bringing in knuckleheads, and we don't want that.
Yeah. If everyone was
But assuming you had all good players, it does sound awesome.
Yeah, if we were all 120 IQ,
right?
Plus, that would be one thing.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we don't live in that world.
Right. But this was something I had been thinking about, because it's like you've got these patron players or whatever, and they're potentially moving armies across the map and all this stuff, and it's like very easy, I think, to have time paradoxes and things that. Not necessarily even paradoxes, but things that just aren't going to end up working. Because it's like, if I assault the village where these guys are hanging out and doing their training, but they can't play that day.
Right.
It's like there's potentially problems there.
That should be something that is spotlighted for both people. You know what I mean?
Right.
And how do you make that happen?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And maybe there is an answer. I know that Jeffro is doing he has his new Battle Bronstein thing where kind of handling the bigger kind of patron movements in like a one night thing. But this is getting a little askance of what you've written about. Those aren't concerns that are here, because I think this is mostly meant for generally like a single table, single GM with the same players, but you're running multiple characters.
And hopefully with this book and with more and more people talking about this, people think more about these edge cases, and it becomes a more what would you say? The rough edges of recovering something which an overwhelming majority of people do not have a tremendous amount of practice with, even if this seems to them a really good idea and they want to be all in on it. The overwhelming majority of people have not been doing this and have not been doing it for decades. That is a tremendous boon. So I'm curious what more people have to say as time goes on, as these things become more visible and more remembered and more put into practice.
One just final additional thing about the one-to-one time that is also an immediately problem is solved is this issue of 6 days of in-game time have passed, and I've advanced from level 1 to level 7. Things that make no sense because you're picking up time where it left off, and each session. I did run recently 2 sessions of a game, Wretched Epoch, that took place in the same night. So it's that sort of thing. If you're doling out experience, you can have people advance in level way too quick for any sort of verisimilitude to actually be present. So it does solve that as well. But again, that's also something that like any timekeeping in general, if any
timekeeping general
could potentially solve that,
would mitigate that.
And I think I admit that at some point, or at least I have like on my Twitter or something like that. It's not like timekeeping is just all I'm pushing, and I'm just trying to do it in a way that I think, like you're talking about, like just ease of implementation. So like if I get a text message, that's timestamped. If I get a Discord message, that's timestamped. If I put a comment on your YouTube channel, that's timestamped.
Right.
It's not like really any sort of communication at this point is automatically recorded for me. So that's what I'm thinking of, basically in those terms. When I talk about it.
Yeah, there's one other thing. This is also in the beginning of the book that I absolutely loved, was that you actually had it's like, what are the expectations of the GM, We also had what are the expectations of the player,
Mhm.
you know, and actually placing some
Right.
expectations on the player, which I think that most people don't do,
No.
and that it's a huge mistake because
Yeah.
a lot of players basically think, well, I can just show up. This guy's going to teach me how to play, and then
Yeah.
I'll just wait for him to feed me whatever is happening
Mhm.
in the game, and
Yep.
that is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, no, it's a problem. You know, and if you're again, that's the thing about like the downtime is that effectively, you know, this is way I would always describe it is your downtime orders are players writing your GM notes for you.
Yeah.
Like that's what that is, like kind of effectively, you know. So all that time that you were spending, kind of like plotting, like doing your Charlie Day, like you know, quest board, and like driving yourself insane with like caffeine and late nights. You're now kind of you're able to do that, but like with the players involved, and you know, so in that situation, the players take on like sort of a little bit of the creative burden, and they take on sort of the responsibility for maintaining the campaign. So
Mhm.
the style requires the player to have some responsibility. And so and responsibility comes expectations.
Right.
So like, yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
before I talk about anything else, I talk about having a like filtering, you know, like,
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
like I'm a
That's
big believer in like not opening to everybody.
oh yeah.
Yes.
That's a 100. Like we have like earlier in the year when we first started making these videos, we had a video that was basically about like, you know, how to run good games. What are our advice for like if you're starting a new game? And our rule one was about basically sitting down with everyone and setting the intention of like what we're doing, making
Mhm.
sure everyone's on the same page. But then we were like, there's a previous step to that. So it's like, it's not, or that was our rule 0 for our table. But
Mhm.
for us, it was like rule -1 is make sure you get the players that you want to play with. Like,
Yeah.
don't just, you know, I understand that it's hard for people to
Yeah.
find players.
It's no excuse though.
No.
But it's not just that it's no excuse, but it's I think that we've talked about this a lot before. Like, I really do believe that having bad gaming experiences is way worse than just not
Yes.
gaming.
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't always feel that way until you get
Yeah.
into the
Then
shit,
you know.
and then you know, oh man, I wish I had just stayed home, you know.
Uh-huh.
And so it's we very much recommend that people vet their players and make sure that they have people who all want to be there and all want to be and all generally want the same thing out of
Yeah.
out of
Which
the game.
requires you to know what you're here for.
Right.
You
Right.
can't vet anybody, whether you are the GM or whether you're a player in an existing group who's being asked their opinion about someone who is asking to join or who we're talking about maybe letting in. If you have no idea why you're here, if you don't know really what you primarily enjoy out of the game, then you are not. I mean, this is like you shouldn't be in the group either. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly,
You know, your lies have yet to be uncovered. But
right.
you know, again, put effort into this thing,
Yeah.
into this activity, this hobby.
And
Yeah.
and this was and again, this is another one of the great things is that like this style of game of playing it as a sandbox and relying on at least from what I understand is that, you know, relying on these procedures and random tables and things like that to kind of drive the game and having, I think the most important part is player agency being front and center. That eliminates the need for all this prep that people do.
Mhm.
Yes.
And it's something that I abandoned such a long time ago that I almost forgot
Yeah.
what it was like. You described the ways in which people prep their games, and I was like, this
It's
sounds
so insane.
like hell. Yeah.
And I know people like this. I've gamed with people like this where there will be this needless obsession to detail. There's one person I'm thinking of in particular who's run a lot of games.
Say their
and
name. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. The social security number is.
Yeah.
would run a lot of historical or games set in a historical setting.
Yeah.
And the agonizing detail over the most insignificant minutia and making sure it was right whether this event, which is not important at all,
and not even certain to happen.
Not even sure that happened. Is it said to have happened on a Saturday or is it said to have happened on a Tuesday?
Yeah.
And it's like, what? And invariably, these games would run for a handful of sessions and then they would stop.
Yeah.
Because the guy was burnt out, and understandably so.
Yeah.
And B, all of the tremendous effort that was burning him out wasn't like the mileage of that material is so minimal.
The benefit is so small.
It's not even anything. It's a net burden. You're just adding weight to the car.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have at least ran an interesting game for a good while if that obsessive drive was put into relevant areas.
Right.
But
yeah,
there's also, have you ever seen the HBO show The Rehearsal with Nathan Fielder?
I have not. No.
Okay, so it's one of the most demented and bizarre shows I've ever seen. But the way you described the way that some people prep, where they're basically making this like branching flow chart of like, if they do this, then we go here. Like that, it's so insane. But I know that people do that. Mm-hmm. But the premise of the show, The Rehearsal, is that Nathan Fielder helps people to solve some problem in their life by doing that for them. By having they have to like tell their secret to their friend and they're not sure how they're going to react. They literally build out the set of where they're going to meet them. They hire actors to come in and play the person opposite them. And then they go through every possible permutation of the conversation. And it's crazy and it seems crazy.
That's his style.
Yeah, but it's apparently normal that GMs are doing this.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. You that's a lot of that. So some of this so the more extreme examples probably were not pulled from my kind of personal experience, but it's like some of it's pulled from my personal experience, some of it's pulled from like kind of firsthand knowledge of people I've gamed with, and some of it, like I'm very kind of plugged into kind of like the indie influencer like YouTube because I think it's important to kind of see what's going on there because it's like I do try to talk to people where they're at as far as like kind of what they're willing to listen to, and that's kind of like right now. Like that's like this is changing, but right now they're sort of the only game in town, so that's the only frame of reference a lot of people have, even if they don't kind of like slot in there perfectly, like by osmosis. They sort of adopt these sort of assumptions.
Right.
So
yeah, completely. And you're absolutely right. The state of the hobby and the influencer advice, it's not even. It's like just non-advice. Sometimes it's costly, sometimes it's wrong, but most of the time it's just nothing.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what they're doing. Yeah.
It's not for
anybody though.
It's not for anybody. The only reason people are doing this is because the hobby is just this river, and there's this tremendous current behind, the behemoth of D&D. Okay, I'm going to try this thing because I saw Stranger Things or because nerddom is cool now. Not only do I have no real idea of what this is, I don't really care and I'm not invested and I'm just stepping in the water and I'm just letting it carry me wherever it goes. And like, okay, I'll watch this thing. Yeah. I'm not changing anything one way. I'm not even changing to get after I listen to, XYZ D&D influencer, it's not like these people are getting worse or better. They're exactly the same, and nothing. And literally no information was retained.
Oh my god, that's an incredible way. Like that's an incredible observation because I was like, again, like every now and then while I'm working, I'll put one on, and I can't tell if the video is from 5 years ago or from 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
because it's
it does not matter.
It doesn't matter. And again, to get back to that book, The Elusive Shift, this is something that Nick was telling me about because I haven't finished it yet, but basically every conversation that comes up about the anything related to RPGs, the nature of RPGs, pick anything, all of that conversation had already happened within 1 year.
Yeah, immediately.
Within 1 year of D&D's release.
Yeah.
The difference was that it was a bunch of guys in like Berkeley and MIT wargaming clubs. So the conversation was much, much better than it is now. But it's like no one's learned anything. And to the point of like the kind of mimetic explosion and these different groups coming in that weren't part of the wargaming thing, this was something you had brought up to me maybe a month or two ago, that there's like the nature of how the games are played is in isolation. You know, we're not all out there. It's not like playing video games online where there's this like tremendous interconnectivity of everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Every group is isolated.
And you have to sell. A game creator has to sell their product to people. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is no the end product of the game at the table has no audience and is not sellable, and therefore I'm not tremendously convinced of like that a huge like cultural shift is even possible.
No, that's not.
Yeah.
I don't think that's possible either, but again, it doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. But it's also why the conversation has not moved forward an inch.
Mm-hmm.
You know, very smart people very early on were able to see the second and third order effects, and were considering what does it mean to role play how, role play in what manner, in which genre.
Looks like we got a super chat here for 6 shekels from Dare to Wonder. Learn from Aristotle, plan a plot by necessity.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that means.
I don't know how it relates to.
Well, if you're planning a plot, okay, no. I understand what it means. The plot is going to evolve out of the necessarily out of the facts of the game.
Correct. Yes, I actually got something for this. So just to relay, talking about kind of building on that, and kind of talking about like solo actions that would normally take away from the table. Right. I have a player currently at the moment who has sort of like he's about to hit level 10. With this like one of his characters, and this particular character managed to become the vassal of a kind of a count. So he's like he's sort of one of the court magicians of this count, and he's now in this situation where like certain political realities have manifested to where like a civil war is starting to brew as like kind of the queen starts to kind of lose her power. Anyway. He was just I kind of put like where the rumors are starting to reach the PC's ears, like kind of in the I call it the tavern. So the tavern is like that's like people, they were starting to get kind of wars and rumors of wars, and this player immediately like goes into his downtime chat and asks me like I'm gonna go see what my lord is like, which side he's gonna like fall on, like is he a royalist, is he, and so he's gonna like he's like currently in transit on horseback to go to like his lord's city from his own holding, and he's gonna like try to figure out what's going on and try to like help pick a side in this like brewing conflict, and we're able to sort of do that, adjudicate all that, and not have to bore everybody else to tears.
Yeah. It's great, but we were talking about this because the bros talk about the great thing about running the kind of the Grand Braunstein campaigns and everything like that is you get this fog of war because of all of this, and these downtime activities. If you shift the kind of spotlight to a downtime activity, it allows those players to do these things in a way that the other players don't have any knowledge of what they're doing, and so you do get a fog of war. And that makes for some very, very interesting opportunities when everyone is at the same table doing the same things, because things are going to, if you have players working in opposition to each other, they might not even know it. And that can create really, really interesting stuff. So instead of having the standard way that people have played for, the last 30 years or so, or however long it's been, of we're going through the party's grand story, and even if you're doing it in kind of the emergent way, you're not railroading them necessarily, but the spotlight is always on them. You miss out on all this really cool stuff. Like the idea of like it was a good title for the book, The Living Campaign, because this does create a more living world. You know, like
Mhm.
there's things happening outside of everyone's control, which is just
Yeah.
awesome. That always adds things to that has never detracted from a game ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like simultaneously, like they have more control than ever and less control than ever, like at the same time.
Right.
So
Mhm.
it's like they're more in control of their characters' lives than they've probably ever been,
Yeah.
like before that. But as far as the events that kind of flow around their characters, they're in, you know, they have less say over that than they have ever had. So yeah, I mean, but like kind of to that point, like the same character, like he collects an income like from his holdings, and
Yeah.
so he's goes in when he has a problem or there's like some of these emergent phenomenon. He is posting quests for the other players, and
Yeah.
they're pumping him for like, you got to pay me, and he's like puts his gold.
Yeah.
They're like, no, like I want
Oh,
more.
that's
I know
funny.
you have more.
Mhm.
And so they have this like these like really sort of like vicious like bargaining like threads like that like go, you know. So but then he like sends him to do his dirty work. It's pretty hilarious.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh man, that's awesome. Yeah, I would definitely suggest get on the Acts 2 bandwagon.
Cool.
Because
Yeah.
this style of play is like so well supported by that game. The domain
Mm.
rules in particular are like we haven't played them yet, and it's going to be quite a long time before the
Right.
actual players get powerful enough for the domain rules to really matter to them.
Yeah.
But we're going to be using the domain rules in the background to simulate some of the campaign activities of the surrounding settlements so that
That
we
sounds
can
cool.
Nick and I can learn them as
Yeah.
as GMs basically.
Mhm.
But in that way you can also it's more than just using random tables to come up with like, oh, what world event happened. It's like you can
Yeah.
strategize as the different nations and everything like that, or city states. And it's perfect for that. And for when players get involved at that level, it provides a really, really in-depth structure for them to do all sorts of stuff. And it breaks it down by different types of like governments. Like if you have a Senate, you know, that partially rules in the nation,
Mhm.
the Senate is totally ripe for all sorts of hijinks. Like you can kidnap
Oh, cool.
senators and it's
Yep.
like just for you can like spread rumors about them or
Yep.
you know
Bribes.
bribe them. All this stuff that's really really good and has systems for you know having vassals under you, or if whether you're a vassal for someone, you know, actually having to pay your duties, giving duties and boons to your vassals. The economics, all, you know, the thing is all the rules are very very simple. There's a lot of them because it covers a broad very broad area in the game that I've never seen another game do anything remotely close to this.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it is
Really, really cool.
awesome. So
Yeah.
if you got people doing downtime activities and doing all this stuff, like Axe is like it's like tailor made for this exact thing. It's really really cool.
Perfect.
And it does have a great integrated mass combat system that does allow your players to get in there and have their hero making a difference on the battlefield as well.
Which is, yeah, and that's great because like, and that's another thing why like a big kind of thing with the book about what was sort of driving me with that is that even if like the system you're trying to use it for doesn't slot into it perfectly, what the book
Mhm.
does is sort of train your eyes what to look for in a system.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
So because like you read the book and you're like, now you can look at Axe and know, oh, Axe is better for this than Pathfinder.
Yeah.
AD&D is better than Pathfinder. Axe might be better than AD&D. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
So it's like you can actually sort of like learn to like rank order things and sort of tailor your system.
Mm.
So like, but if you want to do it with like I know Crossface like kind of did stuff with like 5e to kind of
Mhm.
make it more like a little more old school.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a guy who runs this book, like the things in this book in his 5e game, and it works great for him. So yeah,
Oh, nice.
yeah. So that's kind of the big thing of what the book was trying to do was kind of, you know, you're not going to be able to run a game off it, but it can help you.
Right. No, but it's more useful than that though, because it's not tied to any system.
Right.
So the good thing about this is that it's basically principles for running this style of game
Right.
and running this style of game successfully.
And I would say, you know, I think there is room for another book from you, if you have it, if you
have it in
you, in this,
I do.
because an aspect of the book that I did struggle with when I was reading this is the part 1, part 2 organizational aspect, where it's a lot of what I already read in part 1 was sort of recapitulated in part 2. And this may be a failing on my part, I was looking at this book as, this is a response to conventional wisdom. This is sort of like John McGowan is making an argument against the prevailing way of playing the game, but the axioms of the conventional wisdom of play are not really addressed to sort of take them to task point by point. This book, but this is still an excellent book, and I think reorganizing this and maybe elaborating on some of your thoughts on some of the insights you have, and leaning into this being a book for like newcomers to the hobby. I think that would be a fantastic product that will provide other people, and more importantly you, more value in the financial capacity. But no one is writing anything for either people getting into the hobby or getting out of D&D. All you have just the core rule book of whatever game system. And honestly, most core rule books are shit. And they don't talk about these underlying philosophical axioms.
Most games spend a paragraph, a page at most,
at absolute most.
What is a role-playing game? It's like the assumption is that it's
and you're taking a page to say nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And they say really nothing of they say nothing in those sections, but it's like you can't. The way games are written now, for the most part, is that you already know what this is.
Right.
You already do know how the game is played.
Right.
It's like it's assuming, and for the most part, the people who are buying these games, they are getting the assumption that you have knowledge of what a role-playing game is and how it is typically played. It is correct. The people buying the people buying those things, they do have these assumptions, but the thing is, their assumptions, they're different. Like, people don't all have the same idea of how these games are run, and part of that may be because we're all relying on, like, well, this is the way that I was taught,
right?
Folk wisdom.
Exactly. It's all folk wisdom, and it's like I really appreciate that this book has actual ideas and actual something to say, as opposed to these other games that
don't know
other books
what they are or who they are.
Yeah, and don't say anything, and it that drives me crazy. And it is, I think I think obviously there are different styles of games. Like, you have like the literal story games and things like that. Those are very different than role-playing games as such. And D&D is very different than Vampire and everything like that. But the baseline assumption of like what role-playing games are is they're using terms to communicate with each other, but everybody means something different. And because no one's putting any thought into these things, and it's a huge failure that's hobby wide.
Yeah, and just kind of address a little bit about like kind of that. So that's a really good idea. Like, I'm actually going to write a note about that for a potential kind of follow up. So what I was trying to do here is, like, I wanted to try to get part one was sort of to try to nail it down to, like, this is do this, do that, do this, and then and then occasionally sort of digress and, like, you need to do this because because this, and not really go too far into the weeds about like why you should do this. And then so like if you're sort of bought in, like, you can read part one and kind of you're good. But if you're sort of and if you really want to know like the underlying philosophy of the thing, that's kind of where I went into part 2,
Right.
of kind of in a more granular way of like, look, this is this, like, this is why I say to do this. It's the why section of the book.
Mhm.
And yeah, but I like that's one of those things where it was like when I decided to kind of do it that style, it was like, yeah, like there might be some issues with that, but at the same time, I was kind of like, I wanted it to be like the usable part to be kind of not as long, and so that's when I
right. Yeah, if you want to,
it
you're fighting
definitely
people's
makes
attention
sense.
spans. Got one super chat here. I guess to get to. Bruce Maximus for $5 says, "This makes me super nostalgic for Birthright. Think I'm going to port my game to Axe 2 now to homebrew Bloodlines."
Nice.
Yeah, I never played Birthright, and I was looking for it earlier this year, but they don't have it on print on demand on drive-through. They just have the PDF.
Yeah.
And I have
something I need to take a look at as well.
Yeah. Because it had a mass combat system, and it was very much focused on this, like, you are political power players in the game world. I know Diversity and Dragons really likes it, but at any rate, thank you very much for the $5, man.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Definitely appreciate it. But yeah, it's everybody's kind of in a way talking past each other, I think, and so it's very good to have like actual, clear ideas. There we go.
Yeah, but it's another. I mean, people come to different games from that big D&D river, that has some current that I mentioned. So whatever, almost everybody now has some vague understanding of what tabletop role playings are from the nerd culture out there.
Mm-hmm.
And for those, which is more those sort of assumptions, that sort of general vibe, it becomes sort of more distilled when you're in like the D&D river, which is where most people, first access the hobby. And those who want to leave and play something else like Call of Cthulhu or I don't know.
Candela Obscura.
Candela Obscura. Vampire or whatever. A lot of those people now, like the stain of those assumptions is sort of even more, dyed into the fabric of sort of their mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Having a different access point or a product that is aimed to people who are just getting involved or who have played a few sessions or they played a campaign or they really like Critical Role and they really want to role play, but everything they're seeing everywhere else, they are rightly identifying as trash, and they're not sure what's going on.
Wrong? Yeah.
Again, like that is a benefit.
Sure.
And hopefully, we can slowly breed our own RPG aristocracy.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
we touched on it before, but talked about like parallel systems, instead of like trying to, like, I'm not trying to retake a castle. I'm trying to. It's over. It's never been
oh my
over.
God. Yeah. We say this so much. It's the same. And it's not just like, the idea that we need to like retake WotC or like anything like that. Like, it's so ludicrous.
We can, we're so back, but just somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's fine for things to be over,
It's like in fact, they should be over.
Yeah,
everything dies at some point.
Just let Star Wars be dead. Like it's fine. And this is the thing. When someone you love dies, you mourn for them.
Yep.
And then you move on with your life. You don't continue to live.
You don't be Norman Bates
with the corpse in your house. Like
That's a
we
great
can
metaphor.
just let it be dead.
Very visceral
Yeah.
metaphor that I appreciate. Yes.
Yeah. Because it's
And it
true.
couldn't be true.
It's
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
you're absolutely
With
correct.
regards to the dynamic and the amount of contempt you should feel for these people.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like I make no mention, like, pretty much I use like a point of comparison a few times, but I am not what is it, when I bring up the contemporary stuff, I almost pretend like it's certain parts of it just doesn't exist.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what I am just so tired of like rehashing some of these these subjects. I hate atomization. I hate people not
Yes.
being.
Yes.
I really, really hate that. And I want there are certain ways of playing the game that will facilitate the creation of groups in an interconnected web of groups. So even if you're not going to have like a table with like a bunch of GMs or whatever, I think it's good to have the capacity to potentially do that, to potentially evolve into that. So I take this hobby about as seriously as some of these like kind of like old lawyers in New England take like model trains. Okay, which is to say extremely seriously.
In the true sense,
In the true sense, it's a hobby.
is.
Yeah, that's the thing, because people think like, oh, I play. I almost said Day of Defeat. No one knows what that is because it's fucking old. But I play Halo. That's a hobby. It's like no, that's not a hobby. You're just playing video games.
You're not even playing video games like a hobby. You're just burning time.
You're just it's like I watch a sitcom. That's a hobby. It's like that's not what a hobby is. A hobby is something that you're like
isolation.
you actually dedicate some time and effort and passion to, and you take it seriously. That doesn't mean that like it has to be life or death at all times, like your level of investment.
But there should be a sense in which like there's a desire to like improve through that. Otherwise,
and you get you get satisfaction out of it, not just from the surface level activity, but from pursuing something better within it.
Yes, you're pursuing mastery in something. Which is an inherent good.
It is a good thing. And we got another super chat. Sorry about this. We got Dare to Wonder. Once again, thank you for the 15 shekels.
Thank you,
appreciate it. Iron Rule. Know what you want out of a game. Yes. What it means to get it, and the consequences, and how to communicate it, in my opinion.
The correct opinion.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I would agree with that 100%.
And you have to be intentional about that to do that. And,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why like when I talk, I brought it up a few times, but you watch like Secrets of Blackmore, and it teaches, like, it kind of walks you through sort of the creation, kind of going through Strategos, and like kind of the into the Bronstein, into D&D as we understand it, Blackmore. What I like, so that's interesting, and that helps you kind of like draw some through lines. But the part I saw that I really, really fixated on was that all those guys like still hang out.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
like they've been friends. They built their careers based on kind of the strength of their friendship, their network. Those guys will never like suffer from sort of like social deprivation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I want that for other people.
Yeah. No, I agree.
But
and that was actually we had been pretty viciously critical of the Bros previously, and that was something that I kind of criticized Jeffro about, because he was talking about this everyone's bowling alone and all the social isolation and everything like that. And like for me, that's not a problem. I haven't I have a really, really strong literal social network, not in the sense of like the computer, and that was another thing where afterwards I was thinking, I was like, this is another instance where I'm an outlier. I was like, I know it's not the case for everybody. No. And I know that there's people out there who are like horrifically lonely and isolated and don't have the same kinds of connections that I do. And so this hobby in particular is, I think, a great way to make those strong connections, because you're doing this fairly regularly for hours at a time. And if you are all taking it seriously and engaged in it, you're going to have these kind of connections brought out of it that way. It's an eminently good thing.
But it has to be oriented towards a pursuit of like mutual mastery of something, because That like there is a. I guess it is better to have a bunch of friend groups where you sort of just consume,
right.
rather than be in isolation. But it is a much worse option than we're all coming together to sort of do a thing as best we can.
Right.
You could bond over vices too.
You can bond over vices,
Sure.
and
that's not. You should.
That is a less advantageous. It's better than complete isolation and utter despair, but it is
not
by suboptimal. It is suboptimal. Yeah.
Doc Flamingo here says it's not a real hobby until it's been cited in divorce court, which I'm sure it has been many times.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, and that's.
And thank you for the $5.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And that's like kind of the same kind of my story as well. Is like I have a very strong social network. I have I have very close friends. Like my two groups. Like the one group we've been friends since high school. I'm in my early 30s, and the group here, like some of them were roommates and things. Like I kind of live on my own now. I'm married, but like but we've continued to kind of all stay together. And I was just like talking one of my buddies in that group. He's like HVAC. I work in finance, and I was saying, if everything comes crumbling down, this is why I work out, because like I could lift things, and he said I could put you to work.
Yeah.
I'll always have a paycheck.
Yeah.
To be able to put food on the table. So, like that's a really, really powerful thing is I don't really like worry too much about that. And that's kind of how I evaluate tabletop advice, is based on whether or not it can kind of like it can build into something more instead of just continue like a downward spiral of atomization.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, which is the natural tendency of everything in the current age.
Right.
Correct.
That is what they want.
Yeah.
But
it's it is such a. This is not the future that I envisioned. It's some absolutely dystopian stuff. But it is an excellent way, especially if you can do this in person. But even if you can't, for years I didn't play in person, and this is actually
for 10 years.
Yeah, for almost 10 years. But Nick and I, we met online through playing role-playing games, and we've been friends for a decade now.
Right.
Because of this. And it's if you find people that, even if you play, whatever your play style is, but if you find people who play the same way or get the same enjoyment you have out of it, like you will inevitably make lifelong friends out of it.
Yeah. Great. Like the greatness and the pursuit of greatness attracts other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, and that's kind of like the whole point is like, I'm not exactly, this is why like the price point. That's kind of why it's like the price point is the way it is. Like I'm basically just trying to like recoup a little bit of the cost I put into it, but otherwise, like I'm trying to get this in front of people. Like I think if it's going to help somebody, like I'll be happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you could like if any fraction of the greater hobby read this and took any of the advice, their games would be improved.
Yeah.
Tremendously.
Tremendously.
That's a huge compliment. I really I put a lot of effort into it. So I will I just will disclose that my book does have words. I'm sorry about that, but
someone complaining that it was too wordy.
They complained that it had words. Like that was like it was the weirdest thing in the world.
I bought this paper thing and it was just full of words.
Scott Garibay enthusiast. As we all know from him, books are obsolete.
Yeah, books are obsolete.
Yeah. With the advent of D&D on PDF and eventually on a subscription service.
Yeah.
Books are obsolete.
And Shakespeare doesn't have anything on.
Yeah, Shakespeare doesn't have anything on the go. Yeah, exactly.
Another direct quote.
So true. So true.
That's funny. Yeah. So, but
there's an interesting, just a question for you. Does the book have a digital download version?
Not at present. There's kind of a few extra steps I would have to do with that. I might have one down the road.
Okay.
So,
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But
And for those of you watching, the book is linked in the description of this video, so you can check it out there. It's linked on Amazon. And I hope, since there's 61 people watching, I really hope there's 61 likes on this video.
Yes.
So if you could do us a favor and like the video, that would be great.
And if anybody gets the book and they like it, leave it a review on Amazon. Amazon's algorithm.
Yeah,
for sure. And we will be leaving reviews as well.
Yes.
We just didn't want to leave reviews before we talked to you about it.
Oh, that's very nice. I don't plan on hounding anybody too much. I kind of just talk about it, but otherwise.
Yeah,
it does help. Yeah.
Excellent book.
Yes. Money well spent.
Was there anything that we didn't really cover? I think we actually got through a lot of what's in the book, but is there anything that you wanted to kind of say or has stuck out from the book that we may have missed, something important?
Yeah, actually, so I do want to talk a little bit about I do, a lot of times when you talk about this sort of sandbox game, people think that sort of you do this at the sacrifice of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I really try to, I don't believe that is the case. So the book kind of lays out a way for things to happen, but at the end of the day, your life looks about the same. If you're the DM doing this, you are still your prep now takes the form of interacting with your friends on your electronic device of choice.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still all getting together and doing an adventure around the table. You could still you can still have your really cool characters. You can still have kind of these emergent narratives that come out of things. If you want to drop some hooks because that's interesting to you, you could still do that. Basically, this is a framework to where you can drop the things you don't like, keep the things you do, and that is a thing I would like to emphasize, is that even if you're a quote unquote story gamer, you could still have something there for you. This doesn't mean, we're just going to go in the dungeon, kill thing, get loot, come back, go in the dungeon.
Yeah, for sure. And to that
that's
point,
a concern to people, understandably. But
yeah, this is something we've talked about quite a bit, because we run sandboxes, not in the literal style of except now we are running Axe, so there is going to be hex crawling, but we're not running what is traditionally known as a sandbox with hex crawling and these various procedures, but the game style that we run is always very just reactive to what the players do, you know, and you basically, the player actions should have consequences that are reasonable within the world, you know, that actually makes sense. And oftentimes that can players do wild stuff, and which, you know, causes rather intense consequences to happen. That generates a way more interesting story, and this can involve, you know, heavy in character role play. I think the people that want their games to look like Critical Role, what they're missing, I think they're trying to ape what the Critical Role people are doing in terms of this means I'm supposed to talk a lot, and this is it's really not it. It's more about if you get into your character and try to just to present their actions as authentically as you can. You don't have to be a good actor to do this. That is going to produce a really, really good story. And so, and this doesn't have to be pre-plotted out or anything. And that can happen in a traditional sandbox hex crawling style of game. Just by doing that, it's just, you have to get in character. That's basically all that all that it takes. Because if you are in character, your character is ostensibly
nothing else will happen.
Care about things.
Yeah,
you're going to have goals that you're going to pursue, and there will be obstacles to those goals.
Yes,
and that will produce something far more interesting. And since everybody is pursuing their own goals at the table, and everyone is involved, it's going to create something that you couldn't have come up with beforehand, and it always ends up being a better story.
Because it's theirs. They're invested in it. You're not dropping expositionary stuff on them to where they're just, bored out of them. They don't care that the guard's family or whatever,
Right. Yeah.
Or they might, let them decide. Let them decide whether they care about it or not.
Yeah.
Don't inflict it on them.
Yes.
So.
Oh my God, I know exactly. There's nothing worse. And the thing is, if you try to do that, if you have good players, they're going to do things you don't anticipate, and they're going to break that railroad that you've set up.
Well, right. Even if you're pre-plotting out something, and let's say you have really great like role play focused players, and they have no intention of sabotaging your game. They're
Right.
going to okay. I'll do it. I'll do it for Bob. He's, because they're so good and because they're playing their characters, they are going to disrupt your plot anyway, even in their attempt to follow the plot.
The dice will disrupt your plot.
The dice will disrupt.
Yeah.
Random chance is a problem.
Yeah.
You have to do something about it.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why we need to fudge the rolls and
Right.
sure,
we need to pretend to play a game.
Yeah, exactly. Pretend to play.
So
yeah.
But
no, you're completely right. Yeah.
I
100% agree.
It's sad, but yeah, that was kind of that's the big thing, is like, because I do kind of I think the thing that kind of distinguishes, like, kind of, I'd say, my quote unquote brand is that I do come from a place of like, I try to come from a place of like understanding where people, the concern comes from, because I came from that camp. So like I ran very, very meticulously plotted games, and I was very good at it, and I had I had a good I put a lot of work into it, because like I do have that work ethic, and I had great players too, so that helped. Some of that, even the more ridiculous prep can be mitigated if your players are good. But
I know, it's the game. If you have really good players, the game basically runs itself.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So I am curious. You mentioned you have an alternate group. Is that your Pathfinder group that
they're online? Yeah.
Okay. So how does that game run as opposed to your more living campaign game?
Yeah. So my IRL game is run with AD&D.
Okay.
And we switched to first edition 2 or 3 months ago, something like that. So my Pathfinder game runs very well because we're all extremely familiar with the rules. I don't like, so when session day comes around, all I do is kind of basically review my adjudications for the downtime actions, and then we go. Yeah, and that's prep. And because I know that system like the back of my hand. I plan to run it for 15 years consecutively almost, and so but I will say that AD&D does slot better into it, because of kind of the way that game is sort of designed, kind of from the ground up. Pathfinder took some massaging, and so there are certain things in Pathfinder that work quite well, like the retraining rules. Like you can retrain, there's like 6 or 7 days or something like that, and they're like a certain number of gold pieces. Having one-to-one time actually makes those retraining rules like usable, which is nice. Like as an example, so there are certain things that exist in Pathfinder exclusively that become more viable with one-to-one. But that system also has like very, very granular character creation and requires a lot of sort of like meticulous character building on the part of the players. And then when you couple that with downtime, if they don't absolutely love the game, like they're having to make rolls occasionally, quite often. Whereas AD&D, the rolls are fairly minimal, and a lot of it is behind the scenes, like through the DMG. So I try to run it like where things are located. So if it's located in the DMG, I roll for it. If it's located in the PHB, they roll for it. It's kind of how I do it. So like the assassination tables for the assassin is in the DMG. So when they declare an action for an assassination, I roll on the assassination table, and I let them know if it worked or not, because it's in the DMG. I'm the one who's supposed to know it. Yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it. And like they have access to like what I give them. So in the sense of like their character sheet will have like their to hit and their Thaco and all that. And so they finish up when they can. They hand me their character sheet, and the attack matrices are in the DMG. I finish the character sheet out with all that. Now there are some advantages to that. I realize is that I actually know what all these characters are like, because they all come to me and they're not
Yeah.
built independent. They're not built independently, which is nice. And it doesn't really require too much. Just basically look up some numbers. I write them in the box. I hand it back. Takes 10 seconds. But as far as like for Pathfinder, they're kind of building that from the ground up. I'm not 100% sure what their characters are like. The characters can all be wildly different. Telling me their class tells me nothing about how the character plays. Like there's no two oracles that are run the same way. There's no two clerics that run the same way. Because the feat system is so robust, and it's a great skirmish system. But yeah, it's just you can tell me what your character is, and this tells me nothing. I have no way of knowing like how to adjudicate like off the bat. So I have to, it requires me to work somewhat closer with the players. And really I'm able to do it just because it's like, okay, like I am somewhat familiar with how to look this up. And we have like electronic character sheets that I can refer to, but that sounds like a lot, but it's sort of like I was referring to electronic character sheets when we were playing narrative like through Roll20. So it's just something you have to do.
Right.
Like Pathfinder requires that of you. So
I'm curious, are you using or are you requiring a certain amount of A, downtime expenditure, and B, like role play preparation to justify like feat selection?
So I basically sort of took the training rules and tried to adapt them to kind of based on Pathfinder's economy from first edition. So the training rules are abstract out the whole process for that.
Yeah.
So and the retraining rules are in Pathfinder already, so I just use those kind of as is. So if you're trying to swap out some feats or something, like you can do that. So yeah, like that's kind of like, did I answer your question? That's kind of
you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd rather do my taxes than play Pathfinder.
You mean Mathfinder?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm at the point now where like playing first edition is like I'm a little bit more, what is it? I don't have like the free time of a young man. So
I know. Yeah. It's
playing a kind of more the system, like AD&D is breezy in all the ways that matter to me. So I'm probably after this Pathfinder game, sort of like if it ever dies down or if somebody wants to take it over or something like that, I probably won't be picking up Pathfinder again after that.
Yeah.
That'll probably be the end of an era for me.
Gotcha.
But,
it's interesting though. You're describing it as being breezy because a lot of people seem intimidated by AD&D.
It's pros, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
but
Gary
I'll say in defense of the pros, like I haven't read the entire thing yet, but the AD&D first edition DMG, that's at least an interesting book.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I had the second edition DMG, which is one of the worst game books.
I hate it.
It's one of the worst game books I've ever read. It's like atrocious.
I will never, ever play AD&D second edition again.
Yeah, I loathe second edition. So
I hate it.
Please don't hold back.
Yeah, it's yeah.
I was in a game for a year and a half.
God bless.
Holy shit.
Yeah, it's interesting though because that it is known, like it has the reputation of being very complicated, and I think it, like you said, it's pros, but I think. Do you have a problem with the organization as well? Because the DMG seems like it's all over the place.
Yes. Well, yes. The organization. Yeah. I mean, my understanding, like I did a little research into this. I think I talked to somebody, I don't remember, but like it was like somebody mentioned that it was compiled by like an intern editor. They're like 15.
Oh, it was like, probably just one of the guys, at TSR.
It's like somebody's kid or like
somebody's kid, yeah.
Yeah, like it really like it was a like basically a family business. So yeah like that's kind of what so I mean obviously there's going to be some editing issues. It's got a lot of charm. I don't know. I think that's one of those mimetic things is like in 1979 or 80, whatever, AD&D first edition, then that system was complicated. It was too complicated.
Right.
But we're in a post 3E world now. It's not the same. Like these don't like, and then like so the sort of the inertia of that initial sort of meme is carried on, and then people in their defense though, like the meme is carried on, and they go back to the book and they look at like they see like 7 paragraphs on segments, and they think, wow, segments are really complicated. This is everything I was told and more. And in reality, segments really only come into effect at like matched initiative, and it has like, there's a mixture of like weapon speed factor and that stuff, and it really doesn't like, it's more complicated to explain than it is to play. So
Right.
Yeah.
that's the way I would describe it.
Yeah.
I had to work pretty hard to understand like what Gary was trying to describe. But then once you kind of sit down and play it out around the table, it's just like super easy, super quick. We get 7-8 combats a night, and nobody.
God.
And but I mean, they last like even big combats only last like 10-15 minutes, and everybody is rolling together because it's concurrent. It's turn by side, so everybody's rolling together. Nobody has time to look at their phone, because it's like, okay, I'm going here, you're going there. Okay, all right, that's our turn. We all declare our actions. It goes. You roll your dice. The monster goes. Now everybody's paying attention because they don't want to get hit by the monster. And it's usually like within like 2 or 3 rounds, like the thing is dead. And because it's on 1 minute rounds, like you're just able to mark off like, okay, you guys lost 3 to 4 minutes, and like after 10 minutes gets checked off, I know to roll for wandering monsters. So like things like that, or whatever it is, whatever table I'm using, whatever circumstance it is, whether it's wilderness or dungeon or whatever in the city, there's city tables, things like that. So yeah, it's really not that bad. I think it's overstated at this point.
Right. Which would not surprise me. I mean, based on the, everything's powered by the apocalypse these days, and the people,
there is an IQ crisis.
Yeah, there is an IQ crisis. Yeah.
That is afflicting our modern age.
So actually, you said you started with 4E. What are your thoughts on 4E? Because I played it, like I have the intro.
I bought the DMG and the player's handbook right before I moved because they were dirt cheap in the used section. They had like the whole line there. I only care about those two. But like, if everyone is telling me that this game is shit, there has to be something good about it.
There has to be something good in there.
Because I've seen the caliber of your opinions.
I know.
Trash.
It's like the YouTube influencers will say, they're like, oh yeah, 4E, that was so bad. And it's like, but first of all, I don't think you ever played it.
No.
Second of all, like, I don't try. Like, I think you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a great time.
We will one day we will run a 4E game.
Yeah.
On this channel and piss everyone off.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, I'm kind of with you guys. Like, I don't know if it makes everybody this mad. It's probably like not so.
There's got to be something about it.
There's got to be something has to be good about it.
I played it, like I had it, and it's sort of a similar story. Like I had it, but it like we played maybe like 1 or 2 sessions. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know at the time. I'd only played like in a 3.5 game, months and months before. I didn't know there was a difference. It's just like it says Dungeons and Dragons on the cover. So, so we played a couple sessions of that, and then we got invited to like a more experienced DM, and he was running 3.5, and so we were like, okay, I guess we'll like I don't really know what's going on here. Let's try to learn from him. And then we realized there's an addition difference, and then we got memed into never going back to 4th.
Yeah.
So like I sort of regret. I haven't never really given it a fair shake, and I sort of regret not giving it a fair shake because I don't think it deserves the hate it gets. Yeah. So as far as what I've seen, people, I don't know. I need to reread this stuff. I have it. I have the player's handbook and the DMG somewhere in my house. I don't know where at this point, but. I have to look for it.
One day.
Yeah.
One day.
Nice. Well, I think we are a little over time, so we should probably wrap up. But this was an awesome conversation.
Yeah, this was awesome, man.
Yeah.
I had a great time. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody in the chat, go to the description of the video if you want to get the book, The Living Campaign, which we do recommend. It is on Amazon.com. It's linked there. And also we have our community, our locals community. Yes. So if you guys want to talk to us outside of this chat and outside of the YouTube comments section, go to the description of this video, go to the locals, and sign up there. But it looks like we also got one super chat before we go.
The nick of time.
Canadian dollars, 5 of them. Matthew Pickard, thank you. It's more like a post 5e world, worse in my opinion, since that's where TTRPGs became more mainstream, which made the dicks come in.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. but just ignore, those are people that functionally do not exist, and you do not need to concern yourself with them at all.
I don't acknowledge them. And I'm only interested in people who are trying to, like, they're burnt out and they're trying. That's what I'm trying.
Right.
Those are the person I'm reaching out to.
Totally.
That
100%.
Yeah.
Exactly. Those are the people that know something's wrong and want to actually fix it. Absolutely.
Yep.
That makes sense. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you everyone for joining us in the chat and for the super chats. And we're gonna end the stream now, but we'll see you next week.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody.